Killgrave. Better known as the Purple Man, started off as a pretty standard Daredevil villain in the early days of Marvel. His purple skin and the mind control powers made him visually weird and memorable, but back then writers treated him like a quirky criminal with a gimmick. Over time though, Marvel realized that a man who can override free will isn't just a normal bad guy. He has one of the most terrifying powers in the entire universe. The moment writers leaned into the real implications of his abilities, Killgrave transformed from a cartoonish villain into one of the darkest characters Marvel has ever created. His pheromone-based mind control lets him command anyone around him to do anything, and they obey without question. He doesn't need to hypnotize or trick them, just being near him forces their mind to bend to his. What makes this so terrifying is that Killgrave doesn't see the victims as people. To him they are toys, props, or background noise in the fantasy world he thinks he deserves. His powers are instant, absolute, and completely violating. Marvel eventually started treating him like a walking nightmare, because someone who removes free will is more dangerous than any laser beam or superpower punch. He reached his darkest point in Alias, the comic that introduced Jessica Jones as a former hero who had been mentally enslaved by him for months. This wasn't your typical villain captures the hero plot, it was psychological and emotional torture. Killgrave forced Jessica into a life where she obeyed him while fully conscious, unable to stop herself. The trauma shaped her entire character, turning Killgrave into one of the most disturbing villains in Marvel history. That storyline is still considered a landmark because it treated mind control as a form of abuse, not a cool superpower. Marvel didn't stop at Jessica Jones. Later stories revealed that Killgrave had children, genetically altered descendants, who inherited pieces of his powers. Some were used as tools, some escaped, and some were manipulated into continuing his legacy. Killgrave also returned through clones, psychic echoes, and backup schemes he'd prepared ahead of time. Every time he comes back, writers push the psychological horror angle even further. He doesn't rob banks or build death rays, he breaks people on a personal level, which is why Marvel often uses him sparingly. Too much of him can overwhelm a story. So yeah, he's basically irredeemable. Most villains get sympathy arcs or tragic backstories, Killgrave doesn't. He's fully aware of what he does and enjoys it. Mandrill. His story begins with a mutation that darkened his skin and gave him ape-like features due to radiation exposure. On paper, this was meant to be a sci-fi twist. In reality, however, it created a character who immediately echoed some of the most racist imagery in Western history. Even if the writers didn't intend harm, the result was a black-skinned villain with exaggerated primate traits, something that lands extremely poorly in modern eyes. His very design is offensive before he even speaks or uses his powers. The combination of black-skinned ape villain is exactly the kind of trope that should have been avoided entirely. Mandrill wasn't created as an African descent character, but that doesn't matter. The imagery alone plays into racist caricatures, whether intentional or not. Readers have called out how uncomfortable and insulting the design feels, and even Marvel eventually acknowledged the character could never be rehabilitated visually. His look is something no modern writer would ever pitch, and for good reason. And his pheromone abilities push him from poorly designed to deeply inappropriate. His powers only affect women, and they allow him to mentally enslave them as loyal, obedient, often sexualized followers. This effectively makes him a villain built around sexual coercion. And when you pair that with his appearance, the result is one of Marvel's most disturbing and tasteless concepts ever published. He isn't just a creepy villain, he's a walking collection of racist and misogynistic tropes packaged into a single character. His early comics involved him controlling armies of mind-dominated women, sending them to fight heroes or serve him personally. These stories didn't age poorly, they were already questionable at the time. Looking back at these issues, we don't see a quirky villain from the Bronze Age, we see a horrifying reflection of exploitation and violence wrapped in superhero colors. His actions aren't comic book evil, they are real-world, abusive behaviors magnified to superhuman levels, making the character feel uncomfortable rather than entertaining. Most outdated Marvel characters can be reimagined or rewritten to fit modern values. Mandrill is not one of them. There's no angle to salvage. That's why modern Marvel has all but erased him, as his last major role was simply to mention he died off panel. Marcus. He should have been an interesting character. He was linked to Immortus, connected to Kang the Conqueror, and introduced through time travel mythology that could have led to epic storytelling. Instead, his entire legacy collapsed in a single appearance. In Avengers 200, Marcus revealed himself not as a villain with depth, but as a manipulator who used his time travel technology to trap, groom, and control Carol Danvers, aka Miss Marvel. What should have been a cosmic revelation became one of the most uncomfortable and criticized storylines Marvel ever published. The core of Marcus, in inappropriateness is simple. He mind-controlled and manipulated Captain Marvel into becoming his partner and bearing him into existence. It wasn't subtle, symbolic, or metaphorical. It was a story that treated brainwashing and non-consensual relationships shockingly casually. Marcus framed the whole situation as romantic destiny, and the Avengers just accepted it. Modern readers and writers see the storyline as a disturbing example of how comics once mishandled serious topics like consent and agency. What truly pushed Marcus into infamously inappropriate territory was how the Avengers responded. Instead of being horrified or protective of Carol, they treated Marcus' actions as unfortunate but understandable, even encouraging her to accompany him back to Limbo. This turned the entire team into passive enablers of abuse. Carol's trauma was ignored, her voice was minimized, and the story framed her departure with Marcus as some kind of bittersweet choice, despite the blatant manipulation. It has since become one of the most criticized moments in Avengers history. Reader outrage hit Marvel immediately. The backlash was so intense that later writers effectively retconned Marcus out of existence. In a later storyline, he appeared only as a corpse in a flashback. It was Marvel's way of quietly saying, yeah, we messed up, and eventually the name Marcus was reused for a harmless Kang variant just to distance the identity from the original character's awful storyline. It's extremely rare for Marvel to erase a character, which shows just how inappropriate and hated Marcus had become. And he is remembered now because he represents everything that can go wrong when writers mishandle sensitive themes. And even decades later, Avengers 200 is still pointed to as one of the most tone-deaf, inappropriate plots Marvel ever published. Jenie. Her mutant power allows her to generate seismic vibrations, but only based on how much alcohol is in her bloodstream. The more she drinks, the stronger she becomes. It's a concept that was clearly meant as a dark humor, but the execution came across as shockingly tone-deaf. Turning alcohol dependency into a superpower feels widely inappropriate, especially for a comic aimed at teens. The problem with Genie's abilities isn't just that they are goofy, it's that they unintentionally suggest drinking makes you powerful. In a universe where kids already try to get spider powers by letting real spiders bite them, you can imagine how dangerous that implication becomes. Superhero comics often flirt with strange or silly abilities, but Genie's gimmick crosses into risky territory because it glamorizes something incredibly destructive in real life. Her power doesn't feel edgy or funny, it feels irresponsible. Even if the idea of an alcohol-fueled mutant was meant as satire, Genie wasn't written with nuance or depth. Her entire personality revolves around drinking, struggling to control her powers, and living in a constant state of intoxication. It turns what could have been a commentary on addiction into a one-note punchline. Instead of exploring the pain or consequences of alcoholism, the story uses it as a quirky gimmick, making the character feel like a tasteless joke rather than a sympathetic figure. And her powers also make her widely dangerous to teammates and civilians. The more drunk she gets, the more unstable her seismic blasts become. Instead of helping the X-Force, she often makes missions worse or accidentally harms the people she's trying to protect. And this makes her look less like a hero and more like a walking disaster. It's no surprise that Genie didn't last long. Marvel killed her off early in her run, almost as if they realized the character was too inappropriate to continue using. The Jackal. Miles Warren began as a respected biology professor and mentor figure at Empire State University, but that normal facade didn't last long. What pushed him into disturbing territory was his obsession with Gwen Stacy. His fixation crossed professional, ethical, and moral boundaries, turning him into a deeply uncomfortable figure even before he became a supervillain. Warren wasn't a mad scientist at first. He was a man whose inappropriate attachment to a student slowly wrapped his mind, which feels far more unsettling than any superpower. The moment Warren became the Jackal, everything spiraled. Instead of coping with Gwen's death, he decided to resurrect her through cloning, not out of grief, but out of possession. Creating clone after clone of Gwen made him one of the creepiest villains in Spider-Man history. These weren't scientific breakthroughs. They were attempts to reconstruct a woman he couldn't let go of. The story turned him into a symbol of obsession taken to the most inappropriate extreme, literally trying to rebuild a dead woman so she could exist on his terms. Warren didn't just clone Gwen. He manipulated Peter Parker, Ben Reilly, and countless others with lies, gaslighting, and emotional warfare. He pitted Spider-Man against his own clone, breaking down Peter's identity and causing emotional damage that lasted decades. Miles Warren doesn't fight with brute force. He fights with psychological cruelty, treating people like lab animals. And that mental manipulation places him firmly in the inappropriate villain category because his actions hit far too close to real-life abuse patterns. In the clone conspiracy, Warren took his obsession to a whole new level. He began resurrecting dead Marvel characters with experimental clone bodies, framing it as a gift, when in reality it was another way to control people. His New You project blurred the line between life and violation, reviving people without consent, altering their biology, and placing them in a fragile state where he held all the power. It was creepy and ethically disgusting, playing God with the living and dead because he believed he had the right to rewrite their lives. This character invades people's lives, literally and figuratively, recreating bodies, rewriting memories, and manipulating identities. His damage is intimate and personal. He preys on vulnerability, obsession, and trauma. Grim Reaper. He started out as a pretty standard Marvel villain, a guy with a skite, a grudge, and a dramatic flair for fighting the Avengers. But it wasn't his powers or schemes that made him infamous. It was his open racism. In one of the Lethal Legion storylines, Eric Williams verbally abused and insulted the black members of his own team, causing the group to fall apart from the inside. And this bigotry wasn't a one-time writing choice. It became part of his character. Even after Marvel toned it down, the stain of that storyline followed him. When he returned in later issues, his prejudice expanded in strange directions, targeting not only minorities but also androids, especially Vision. His hatred for Vision was originally tied to his family trauma, but it quickly became laced with dehumanization and superiority, mirroring the same twisted mindset behind his earlier racist behavior. Most villains usually have a theme, like greed, power, revenge, or ideology. Grim Reaper's theme accidentally became hate. His motivations shifted over time from crime and resentment into full-blown intolerance, and that made him extremely uncomfortable to read compared to villains who at least have narrative depth. Grim Reaper wasn't portrayed as misguided or tragic, he was portrayed as someone who genuinely believed he was above others, and that's why he ended up feeling less like a comic book antagonist and more like a reflection of real-world ugliness readers didn't want in their escapism. He has died and resurrected more times than most villains, but every reincarnation brought the same problem. How do you write this character without bringing back his controversial baggage? Marvel tried smoothing him out, focusing on his bitterness, his obsession with his brother Wonder Man, and his jealousy of Vision. But even when toned down, the legacy of that earlier story lingered. Readers remembered him not as a dangerous foe, but as the racist guy with the skite, a label no amount of retcons or costume changes could shake off. Over time, Grim Reaper shifted from problematic villain to awkward piece of Marvel history. He's dangerous enough to fight Avengers, but his character is burdened with writing choices that age terribly. Nowadays, writers don't usually lean into those elements because they know they would ignite backlash, but ignoring them doesn't make them disappear, and as a result, Grim feels like a villain stuck between eras, too offensive for the present, too integral to erase, and too shallow to reinvent. Ultimate Hank Pym. In the Ultimate Universe, Marvel took Hank Pym, already a controversial character in 616, and amplified all his flaws to the extreme. Instead of a brilliant but troubled scientist, Ultimate Hank is written as insecure, petty, jealous, and constantly seeking validation. His intelligence becomes a tool for manipulation, rather than heroism. From the very start, he feels like a man who is one bad day away from doing something unforgivable, and then he does. The Ultimate line didn't try to redeem him. It leaned into the darkest interpretation possible. The most infamous and inappropriate moment defining Ultimate Hank Pym is his brutal assault on Janet, aka the Wasp. In 616, the slap incident was a mistake Marvel has been trying to recontextualize or heal for decades, but Ultimate Hank goes much further. He hits Janet, sprays her with insect repellent, knowing it hurts her mutated physiology, and even uses ants to attack her. The story was shockingly graphic, and it cemented Hank as one of the most hated characters in the entire Ultimate line. And his abuse doesn't come from heroism gone wrong. It comes from deep insecurity. He feels overshadowed by Captain America, disrespected by his teammates, and inadequate compared to other geniuses. And instead of dealing with these emotions, he lashes out violently, especially toward Janet. His ego collapses under even mild pressure. This version of him becomes a textbook example of toxic masculinity mixed with scientific genius. And after his abuse becomes public, Ultimate Hank tries to reinvent himself as a hero again, but instead of growing, he spirals deeper. He joins the Ultimates with fake sincerity, defects from the team, collaborates with villains, and ultimately becomes a full-blown antagonist wearing a giant man suit to attack his former teammates. Every chance he has to do better, he chooses worse. He isn't written here as someone redeemable. He is written as someone whose intelligence has been corrupted by bitterness. He represents the Ultimate Universe at its most cynical. Heroes as flawed, broken people who cross lines mainstream Marvel would never allow. The abuse, the cruelty, the betrayal, it all makes him one of the most hated characters Marvel has ever produced. Manchu. He wasn't originally a Marvel character. He came from early 20th century pulp novels by Zack Stromer, where he embodied one of the most harmful, racist tropes in Western fiction, the Yellow Peril mastermind. When Marvel introduced Shang-Chi in the 1970s, they licensed Fu Manchu as his father and main antagonist. At the time, they wanted a martial arts comic that felt exotic to Western readers, and unfortunately, that meant digging up a character built entirely on racist stereotypes. In the comics, Fu Manchu was portrayed as a cold, calculating genius who wanted global domination, making him a classic villain, but also an extremely problematic one. In Marvel Comics, Fu Manchu wasn't just an evil warlord, he was Shang-Chi's violent, manipulative, emotionally abusive father. He raised Shang-Chi from birth to be the perfect living weapon, isolating him from the world and brainwashing him with half-truths. Shang-Chi only discovered the truth when he confronted his father on a mission and realized he'd been trained to serve evil. This betrayal became the foundation of Shang-Chi's character arc, a son trying to escape the shadow of a monster who treated him like property. The dynamic was intense and interesting, but it was also tangled in outdated racial imagery. Another huge issue with Fu Manchu in Marvel Comics was legal rights. Marvel didn't own the character, they were renting him. When the license expired in the 1980s, Marvel suddenly couldn't even say his name. That put the company in an awkward spot, especially since Shang-Chi's entire backstory was tied to Fu Manchu. To avoid lawsuits, Marvel had to gradually pull back, referring to him only as my father, the master, or the sorcerer. Eventually, they revealed his real name in the Marvel Universe was Zheng Zhu, retconning everything so Shang-Chi could continue existing without the racist baggage or the legal problems. So Marvel decided to take the problem head-on. They reworked Fu Manchu into Zheng Zhu, a centuries-old sorcerer who led a secret cult and experimented with immortality. He was still evil, but now he was a Marvel origin villain instead of a racist caricature imported from old novels. Writers explored his role as a manipulator, a tyrant, and a father who saw his own children as tools. They turned the evil Asian mastermind trope into a more complex and culturally respected narrative, where Shang-Chi's battle was no longer tied to a harmful stereotype, but to a more personal and grounded family conflict. Starfox. He was created as the total opposite of his infamous brother, Thanos. While Thanos represents obsession, death, destruction, Eros was designed to embody pleasure, joy, and life. Growing up on Titan, he was a charming, carefree golden child who spent more time flirting and having fun than training for battle or studying cosmic secrets. That contrast was supposed to be funny and refreshing. The idea that the universe's greatest villain has a brother who acts like a space playboy. But that light-hearted setup would later collide with the darker implications of his powers, turning him into one of Marvel's most controversial characters. His powers are where everything gets messy. He can simulate the pleasure centers in people's brains, making them feel relaxed, euphoric, affectionate, or very suggestible. On paper, this was originally meant to be harmless, a fun, flirtatious ability that made him charming in any room. But fans and writers eventually realized how ethically terrifying that actually is. Being able to make people feel pleasure, trust, or attraction without their consent is basically mind control wearing a pretty outfit. Writers didn't touch this issue for decades, but once comics started taking consent seriously, Starfox's powers went from silly to straight up dangerous. Pleasure manipulation powers during intimate encounters, something he acted like was completely normal. Even She-Hulk herself started questioning whether their past flirtation or interactions were truly consensual. This storyline reframed Starfox as a character with dangerously unethical abilities and opened up a conversation comics had avoided for decades. After that arc, readers couldn't see him the same way, and Marvel quietly reduced his appearances because his entire power set was suddenly a moral nightmare. Because of that She-Hulk storyline, Starfox practically vanished from comics for years, only resurfacing occasionally in big cosmic events like AXE, Judgment Day. Fans were shocked when he appeared in the MCU, played by Harry Styles, because he's one of the hardest Marvel characters to adapt without rewriting his entire concept. His power set is creepy. His name literally references erotic desire, and his reputation in the comics is messy at best.